All right, so we are looking at day 5 today. We hammered the crap out of you guys on Friday with a million notes. Today we got an easy one. Today is honestly like and you know most of the time our classes are kind of arranged like this. You know, you get a little gentle one just before the midterm. Um, and so today we're just looking at human movement science. So what's kind of cool is like until now we've been studying a lot of like structures and stuff, right? Noel, this is your first class, right? Or your first course, I should say. Um, and so until now we've really looked a lot at uh, just general terminology, and we've looked a lot at structures, right? Where it's like, this is what this is. A lot of anatomy until now, right? Well, today is where we're almost diving into the physiology side of things. Like if anatomy is what something is, physiology is what something does. So kinesiology is how something moves, and anatomy is still, what something is. So until now, we really have kind of looked a lot at anatomy and anatomic locations and things like that. Today is where we get into understanding how our body uses that nervous system to recruit that muscular system and move that skeletal system. So we are looking at things like force today. Not the force, although I would love to talk about that for a couple hours. But just force and how it interacts with the world we live in. We're going to look at length versus tension. We're going to look at these things called force velocity curves, which are really fun, force couples. And then we're going to look at how movement sort of occurs. We'll get a little bit of math in here today, which I apologize for because I'm terrible at it. And then finally, we'll get to how our body actually learns all this stuff.
What about what about the fat burning thing? How do you burn fat? Do you burn fat from the inside out or the outside in?
That's a great question, and that is something we will cover. Actually,
and how many
it's
types
ironic.
Of fat
for
are
you,
there?
it'll be your third mod. We will get into that in 2 mods from now. So we're actually kind of far away from like talking about how we burn fat. But to answer your question, yeah, generally, and this is a general rule of thumb. This is definitely not like a rule. But generally, when you gain weight, it starts in your center and works its way out. And when you lose weight, you start your outside and work your way in. So yeah, that is kind of how that normally works. Like a lot of people will start with like, that's why like revealing your abs is the final thing that happens when you're on like a weight loss program. Like,
so you get everything else but the abs.
Totally, but your arms will look great for just before your abs do. So there's always that.
So why do they attack the abs first then, more than they attack everything else?
Yeah, that's the thing. Everybody's like, they're trying to lose their belly and they do all the like crunches and stuff. I've looked this up a million times and I can never remember the answer. But here's the thing. People do like a million sit-ups to try to lose weight all the time, right? And it's like working muscle in the area where you burn fat doesn't necessarily make you burn fat in that area, right? There's no way to target fat loss. You cannot target an area for fat loss specifically. It just doesn't work that way. So you'll get people who will just do a million. So what you want to do is you just want to burn as many calories as possible. And when you burn as many calories as possible, you will lose fat overall. But
at the same time, tight and skinny too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But then people will only focus on the abdominal stuff because that's where they want to lose the fat. So they'll do crunches, and crunches are a great exercise for strengthening your core. They're a horrible exercise for weight loss because let's see how many, because they're just not very large. They're not very
intervals. You talking about intervals?
They're like bacon strips, right? Versus your glutes, which is a freaking rump roast, So watch this. How many sit-ups does it take to burn 1 pound of fat? So a pound of fat is 3,500 calories, right? That's how many calories are in 1 pound of fat. So if you want to lose a pound, you need to create a calorie deficit of 3,500, okay? Here's how many sit-ups it takes. So in general, all right. In general, Vigorous calisthenics, such as push-ups and sit-ups, will burn about 430 calories in an hour if you weigh 130 pounds. So you'll burn about like 430 calories. And if you weigh 155 pounds, you'll burn about 500, right? So it would take a little over 8 hours of body weight, full body exercise to burn 3,500 calories. So that's not very realistic, right? This actually isn't what I was looking for. But that wasn't very realistic just because that's a lot of calories that you'll need to burn, and, strictly through movement alone. What is better is to diet while also increasing your caloric burn. If you do both simultaneously, now you're getting it from both sides. So you don't have to exercise for 8 hours. You can exercise for an hour a day and create like a little bit of a deficit every single day. But now, hold on. One sit-up usually burns, there we go. So if a 145 pound person performs sit-ups at a moderate pace of 20 per minute, they're going to burn about 4 calories per minute. So if you did 20 sit-ups every minute, right? So that's 1 every 3 seconds. So 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. That's a sit-up. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000. That's another sit-up. If you did that many, it would take you 875 minutes, which means you would end up doing 17,500 sit-ups in order to burn 1 pound of fat.
That's
Not
crazy.
very realistic.
It ain't worth it. It ain't worth it, man.
Not worth it, right? So instead, we want to work our whole body. We want to do a little bit of cardio, and we want to diet. And if we do those things, we'll burn lots of calories, because if you were to just simply like walk at a general 3.5, and let's see how many calories. So that was, what was it? It took, hold on, how many was it? It was 4 calories per minute. So 4 times 60. So they were burning 240 calories per hour at the general sit-up pace, right? So now let's say, how many calories per hour do you burn walking? So just walking, you're going to burn 360. So that's way more. And that's walking at 3 miles an hour.
That's more than a sit-up.
Oh, totally. Plus 3 miles an hour, dude. Like, that is a casual stroll. That's like how fast you walk when you're grocery shopping. Like,
Yeah.
3 miles an hour. So, like, you walk 4 miles an hour, which is like a brisk, somewhat tough pace. Now you're going to be burning plenty of calories, So that's what we're looking for. All right. Let's go ahead and get into our movement stuff. So today
Hey, another
we're
thing, man. I got one more question.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Hey, did you post up homework too?
Yes, I did, but I linked it to homework 1 because I screwed up. So I labeled it homework 2 on the link, but the link took you to homework 1. So
yeah, I thought of
yeah. If you go to the assignments page, so as you go to Canvas, and you go, instead of just going to that page, if you go to assignments and you scroll, actually I'll put it up top now. If you go to PFT 119,
everything was back to normal, except Melvin. George and Harold knew that wouldn't last.
have this up top here.
You.
You can always click it on the assignments page, and that will do it. But you won't have to do that. I fixed it, so you shouldn't have to do that anymore. Hopefully I won't screw that up in the future.
So we could just go down the line and just do it, complete them all if we want to, huh?
Yes, yeah.
Go ahead, huh?
Yeah, and it'll be on the list there. I don't think I can do it from the quizzes page. There's also a quizzes page. That's the assignments page, and then quizzes is here. Yeah. Yeah, this is super disorganized. The quizzes page just does it alphabetically, and I can't change the order. So yeah, I say go to the assignments page, or now I fixed the link I fixed the link today.
So the assignment was a hard copy. You did a hard copy printout, right?
You could do that if you want to, yeah. Just make sure you
But I
fill the
try to.
answers out on Canvas as well. Yeah, I will always send you the hard copies because a lot of people like to keep them and then use them as like study guides, you know, because it just has like a bunch of answers on it. So you're always welcome. I mean, I will always send you the hard copies as well.
So we got to do the homework in the quizzes.
You just have
Or
to do
just
them
the
on
quizzes?
Canvas.
Okay.
But if you want to do hard copies, you're always more than welcome to.
Okay.
But it's not required. All right. All right. Here we go. So this is a fun one. This is a fun and kind of easy one. Because today we really are talking a lot about like how the movement actually occurs. So the purpose of today, we are looking at the components of the human movement system and how we work, how they all work together to perform, learn, and produce movement. So today's lesson is really where we are kind of diving into understanding force, the difference between length-tension relationships, force velocity curves, so like when force is at its highest versus when it's lowest, force couples, so muscles working together, and leverage and a little bit of joint motions. And then we're going to understand like motor behavior, so like how we move, motor control, motor learning, like how our brain actually learns new movements. So it's kind of a really fun one today. So yeah, I'm excited to dive in. Do you guys have any other questions before we get moving? Just because sometimes I know I go on these long tears.
No, I'm.
Oh, Irina, yeah, it muted and then unmuted. You had a question? Something?
No, I'm good. I'm
Okay. You got like, it like did the double. It was like, ah.
Did it really quick. That's probably what.
Yeah. All right. So the human movement system has to, right, we've already kind of talked about this, but it has to be like aware of its environments, both internally and externally, right? And so in order to do that, it needs to gather like the necessary information from both of those environments in order to produce the appropriate responses. So what that means is like the information coming in has to be good information. And if you have sensory receptors that just aren't very sensitive, you might not have adequate information coming in. So in order to ensure like proper, info coming in, we need to train our nervous system for that. And then you might have improper movements going out. You might have the improper type of movement going out on the other side of things, right? So we need to make sure that we adjust for that as well. And so we have to understand like posture is our movement system gathering information and responding to that information. And a lot of times if you have like a disconnect on one side or the other, you're going to have altered movement patterns. So that's what overactive versus underactive muscles are, right? An overactive muscle is a muscle that's firing too often, right? It really shouldn't be firing as much as it's supposed to. And an underactive muscle is a weaker muscle that is not firing enough. It's not firing as much as it's supposed to. So a lot of times when we look at like the traditional perception of muscles, a lot of people kind of think that like they really only work in one plane and they really only like work to squeeze, right? That's a very traditional outlook. And we just know that that's not true. Our muscles work in multiple planes of motion. For instance, your biceps, right? They're primarily in charge of flexion extension, but they also do pronation and supination, right? So they work in two different planes of motion. Now, primarily, they're working in one plane at a time, but like just because it's predominantly in that plane doesn't mean that it's only in that plane. That's something we kind of said on Friday, right? It's easy to study the planes, when you're studying it, you kind of want to just picture it as being perfectly, in one direction. But we know that our human movement system has to constantly move through all three planes of motion. So if you're only good at one or the other, you're going to struggle whenever you have to do those other movements, You have a lot of people who like work out, they do all these like sagittal plane movements, and then all of a sudden they turn to twist and grab something and then they pull a muscle, right? Because they only trained in this plane instead of like that transverse plane, right? So then we also traditionally, we see people only work their muscles like, you see people in the gym doing like this kind of thing where they're like, and they're putting all their effort in, they're like, oh, ah, and then they just like drop their arms, right? Or they're like ah, wham, and then they just drop it, like boom, really hard effort, and then no effort, like, and it's like you only worked concentrically there, we want to make sure that we teach our muscles to work in all three muscle actions, right? We want to do concentric, eccentric, and isometric contractions. So in order to understand all of that, we do kind of need to understand a little bit about force. So like I said, we're going to get a little mathy today. But when we're talking about like what force is, right? Force by definition is an influence applied by one object to another object, which results in either the acceleration or the deceleration of that second object, right? So it's the interaction between two entities that results in either accelerating or decelerating. So either speeding something up or slowing something down. They don't say it here, or it could just be isometrically stabilizing as well. So for instance, like one of the things that we say about your muscles generate force, right? So like if I've got like my little Star Wars mug here, right? And this weighs probably about a pound, right? So if I generate 2 pounds of force in my bicep, I will overcome it and it will accelerate this object, right? But if I generate a half a pound of force, right? Because this mug weighs more than a half pound, then it will accelerate in the opposite direction. I will, decelerate this muscle, but I'll be accelerating in the antagonist. So like this applies more force than my muscle did. And it's ironic because I did this on purpose. It is a Star Wars mug, so it applies the force. I went out of my way to pull out my Star Wars mug before today's lecture. And I never get to do that when I'm actually at Sochi. So small victory in quarantine world. All right, so that's what force is, right? It's either the acceleration or deceleration of some other object. If you're producing force, that's a concentric motion because you are overcoming the other object and you're accelerating it. If you are decelerating, right, you are eccentrically contracting. You're contracting for less force than whatever resistance you're applying to it. And so we're designed to be able to move this way, right? But here's the thing. We are designed to move this way, but we often screw it up. I do it, you do it, we all do it. We've all got, because of like the stresses of our everyday lives, overactive and underactive muscles that are pulling us in altered directions, right? So that's where we need to understand. And I would say, I would say this is the most important thing of today's lesson, right here, right off the bat. So we need to understand what is called a length tension relationship, right? It's the relationship between the length of a muscle and the tension that muscle can generate. So what a length tension relationship is, there's actually kind of two definitions here. It is the resting length of a muscle and the tension that muscle can produce at that length, okay? So basically, like when you think of a muscle, you want to think of it like, I'm gonna do the paint thing here. When you look at a muscle, you kind of want to picture it like this, right? You get like the tendon side, and then it kind of bulges out, and then becomes like another tendon. Ooh, that's not great. This is gonna be rough. Arch. There we go. So this is kind of what you want to think of as drawing is so hard. Okay, there's your general muscle, right? And then it would have like a tendon on both sides. So there's a general muscle, right? And we'll draw some, we'll put some fiber. Oh, I shouldn't do that. All right. So this is the normal resting length of your muscle, right? So let's just call this one here like normal length, right? So what this muscle has is it has an ideal length tension relationship. Okay, this is exactly what we're looking for here. But then sometimes you're going to see a muscle that looks like this. It's nice and large, it's kind of a big you know, that you might think that it's like, oh, well, that's a large muscle. That's a muscle that's been, you know, strengthened. Look at how fat it is, right? It's a big hypertrophy muscle, right? But what we're actually seeing here, this is what is an overactive muscle. Okay, this is not exactly what we are looking for. So this is an overactive length, right? Which really what that means when we say that it's overactive, it is shortened. So now it's not as long as it should be, but it still has to attach to a bone in the same place, right? Like you can't change where your muscle attaches as a tendon, right? So like this big lengthened muscle here, right, is overactive, right? So now when you look at the other side of the joint, if you go to the opposite side of the joint on this muscle, what you're gonna end up seeing is you're gonna see an underactive muscle. So you're gonna see a muscle like this that's being like super stretched out. Right, way longer on the other side. And it, you'll notice, is kind of a thin muscle, right? And so this is an underactive muscle. Oh my God, writing is so hard. So that's an underactive length. Right, this one was shortened, so this one is lengthened. Right, so there's what we're seeing, right? This is, you want your muscles to be in an ideal length. And now what I'll do is I will Google a better picture than this. But you got to kind of see it happen in real life. So hopefully that, let's have an overactive versus underactive muscles. So this is my favorite picture on the internet. This is such a great picture that kind of describes this. You'll notice this right here is a muscle imbalance. This muscle is pulling for the equal amount as this muscle here, right? But what we're seeing here is you get this big overactive muscle and it's altering the joint. The joint should be sitting at 90 degrees, right? It should be sitting upright like this. But now it's like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It's leaning all the way this way. You got this overactive on this side and this underactive on the other. So what is happening here is you have an altered, you have a screwed up length tension relationship, right? Now, that is where the resting length of that muscle and the tension that it can produce is reduced. And here's the thing. When you look at this muscle pulling, you would say, oh, this is the strong muscle and this is the weak muscle, right? Like that's kind of right where you would sort of jump to. And honestly, I describe it like that to my clients all the time. But you and I, as fitness professionals, need to understand this. Even though this muscle is bunched up and it's pulling for more force than it should be, that does not mean that that muscle is too strong. It means that it is pulling when it is not supposed to. The nervous system is overactive. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily stronger. Because here's the other definition. I told you there's two definitions to this term, right? A length tension relationship is, well, an ideal length tension relationship is the greatest degree of overlap of actin and myosin filaments. So look at this picture here, right? Do you notice, what you want to pay attention to is, pay attention to how much space is at the end of this little sarcomere here. Remember, sarcomere is the section where actin and myosin overlap each other, right? Look at how there's way too much space over here, right? There's a little bit of space here, which is exactly what we want. And then there's like no space to move over here. This is an overactive muscle. This is an underactive muscle, and this is a normal length muscle. So when you are over here, and this red line that's moving up and down, this red line represents how much force your muscle can generate. So here, very little force. Here, very little force. Here, lots of force. So shortening a muscle more than you are supposed to will result in a weak muscle. Lengthening a muscle beyond what you are supposed to will result in a weak muscle. So we want to have an ideal length tension relationship in every single muscle in our body, right? So if we look at like, actually, it's already up here. I was about to Google something else, but then here it is, right? This, look at how there's barely any grip. It's almost like it's just like hanging on by a finger, right? An underactive muscle, there just isn't very much overlap between the actin and the myosin. That's why it's underactive. It can't get a good grip in order to create like a strong contraction. And then in an overactive muscle, there's too much overlap and there's no room to move, right? Like, see this actin strand? It's got to move towards the midline here. And this actin strand needs to move towards the midline here. Here, there's no room to move, right? That's a weak muscle that can't contract very effectively. But here, there is the best of both worlds, right? You are getting plenty of overlap, but not too much. And you're getting you have plenty of room to move, but not too much. Does that make sense, everybody? And by everybody, I mean you too.
Brad, can you please repeat, when it's overactive, there's too much
there's too much overlap. Yep.
There's too much overlap. Okay.
Yeah. So see right here, see how the way like the contraction takes place, the little actin strands, the little blue strands, they got to move, they got to have room to move towards this like middle line here. And if you look at this overactive muscle down here, see how there's no room to move? It's already overlapped. So it doesn't have any room to move, therefore it's weaker than it should be. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
Cool. Noel, how you feeling?
Feeling good, man.
Awesome.
So far, so good.
Awesome. This is literally I would say one of the most important concepts. Like, this is what makes a good trainer, is understanding this concept. Like, understanding that like posture is controlled by muscles that we use too much, so then we get stuck in one position, and muscles that are not pulling us back to the other position. Let's just imagine, for the sake of argument, you ever see this movie? This is I think it's a stupid movie. But if you ever have seen, so I apologize if this ends up being someone's favorite movie, but The Lady in the Water, it's an M. Night Shyamalan movie. I think it's really, really, really dumb. But there's this guy in the movie, and he's like a weirdo who he's like, I'm like a scientist, and he only works out one arm. So yeah, it's like a little skinny arm here. He's got this big fat arm over here. Like, so there's this weird character in this movie. Anyway, this is an example of like an underactive muscle that's not pulling for as much force as it's supposed to. And this is an overactive muscle that's pulling too much. So anyway.
They usually mean you handicap, huh?
What's that?
They usually mean you handicap.
Yeah, right.
Your arm don't work yet.
Right. All right. So our last little like just another little note here. The things you want to remember: lengthening a muscle beyond its optimal resting length will result in force reduction. You're going to have a weak muscle. But shortening a muscle beyond its optimal resting length will also result in force reduction. It will also result in a weak muscle. So sometimes you'll have muscles that are firing too much. They're weaker than they should be. You'll have muscles that are not firing enough. They're weaker than they should be. Okay. And here's what, oh, I forgot. I got a picture of it here in the PowerPoint. So here's, again, kind of showing the same thing, right? You have an underactive muscle here. You got a normal muscle in the middle and an overactive muscle down here, right? This is a great resting length. This is too long. This is too short. So that's a big concept here. So now, just remember that. Again, if you forget everything else, remember that. Let's go ahead and look at what are called force velocity curves, okay? So this is sometimes a little bit complicated, but it's not as bad as sometimes people think it is. Noel, can you do me a favor? Can you slap that mute button just real quick? Just you can hear TV. Thanks, buddy. All right, so let's look at a force velocity curve. what it is, again, this is like a two thing concept, right? So before we were looking at like a length tension relationship, we were looking at the length and the tension it can generate. Now we're looking at how much force versus how much velocity a muscle can generate. And so this is the ability of your muscles. Your muscles have this ability to produce force with an increasing velocity. So as velocity goes up, force production will go down, right? And so basically when you look at contractions, if you have high force, you're going to have low velocity, right? Velocity is the speed by which something happens, right? So when you think about, and this makes a lot of sense for anybody who's ever tried to lift something heavy, where you're like, I'm going to go lift that super heavy thing. And so like it's high force, right? It takes a lot of force to move that super heavy thing. But you go to lift it and you're like, huh, and then it's moving like 1/2 mile an hour, like just crazy slow. That makes a lot of sense, right? High force, low velocity. You're like super heavy weight. Oh God. Like that makes a lot of sense. Versus the exact opposite, which is true. When you have high velocity, you're going to have low force. So, you think about like flinging a baseball, right? It doesn't weigh very much, so you can put a lot of velocity behind it. But, you get hit by a baseball, it hurts, but at the same time, it wasn't very heavy, so it doesn't have a lot of force behind it. So for the most part, it's not really going to take you out. If you were to throw a bowling ball the speed of a baseball and get hit with that, right? A bowling ball has more force behind it. So if it were to move at the same velocity, it's going to, blow your leg off. So that's kind of what we're looking at between like a force and a velocity curve, right?
So say like you in the water, right? You're doing a water workout.
Yes.
Water is the weights are heavier, lighter in the water than if you were to carry heavy weight outside of the water. You know what I mean?
Yes, you would be more. So that's really close to being similar. I will say because you're in water, what you're dealing with is buoyancy. So
Talking about water workouts, weight.
yeah. I love water workouts. I'm a huge fan and a huge proponent. I'm actually one of my like little tiny certifications, one of my sub certifications is like aqua aerobics. So I love water workouts. I will say in the water, things do weigh less because of their density and buoyancy of water. So because like something is less dense than water is, it's going to rise to the top. Just like when you drop like oil into water, it goes to the top. Oil is less dense than water is, so water sinks to the bottom. That's a little bit different than this, just a little bit. But yes, things would be lighter in the water for sure. What we're looking at is like how much force your muscles can generate depending on how heavy something is. So like, so let's look at a ball of paper versus a bowling ball versus like a baseball, right? So a ball of paper has very little force, weighs a couple ounces, right? So, I can fling that thing super, 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 super fast. But because it doesn't have very much force behind it, it's going to lose its momentum really quickly, which is why, we've all done that thing where you're trying to shoot a ball of paper across the room and then just like the air just like stops it and it just kind of falls, right? That's because it doesn't have very much force behind it, right? Versus like a bowling ball, let's say you grab like a 16, 17 pound bowling ball, right? That's fairly heavy. When you try to like whip something like that, right, it's pretty difficult to really get it to move that fast, right? Like, let's see here. I'm kind of curious. Let's look at what the world record is. What is the fastest anyone has thrown a bowling ball? World record fastest a bowling ball ever at 100 miles an hour. Holy crap. Oh, wait. Yeah, and the fastest baseball pitch ever was 106 miles per hour. So that's kind of funny. Phew. So kind of fun there. I'm trying to this is a really fun article that I kind of want to read the rest of. So they're actually, it's like they're looking at like the fastest anyone could ever throw a pitch. It probably won't get
That's
any
only
any
6
faster.
points off from a bowling ball to baseball. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's actually not a huge difference, which I'm kind of surprised by.
Right.
But it does make more sense. This is breaking my analogy just a little bit, but it does make more sense because the lever is much longer, which I guess I get. Like in baseball, you're throwing a lever like this, whereas a bowling ball, you're doing like a whole arm
So you
like
see
that.
the underhand versus the overhand.
So I could understand why that's a little bit different. But baseball can travel faster because of how much lighter it is, right? We can apply more energy to it because it doesn't weigh as much. But if you were to like go, if you were to max out on a bench press, let's say your max bench press is 185 pounds. If you lifted 180 pounds, the fastest you're able to move that is probably pretty slow. But if you grab like a 45-pound bar, you're going to be able to move it super, super fast. So high force, low velocity. High velocity, low force. They are opposites of each other. So if we know that, right, if we know that like one is high and, that means the other is low, but if I go like this one goes down, right? If they're going to constantly like be opposites of each other, what we want to do is we want to work right in the middle, or we want to work the best of both worlds, right? So when we're understanding this, this is where we come to this concept that I would say is probably the second most important term of the day, which is called a stretch shortening cycle. And what that means is it goes in order. You apply a stretch to a muscle that lengthens a muscle out, and then that tells your nervous system to go, wow, we just lengthened out our muscle too much. I don't want to lengthen it any further because that could result in that muscle over lengthening and then tearing off the bone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to contract that muscle, right? So what we see as the velocity of a concentric muscle contraction increases, its ability to produce force decreases. So the more overlap you get, right? Remember, concentrically, you are contracting a muscle. The more overlap you get, the less ability you have to further contract it. Does that make sense? I mean, the actin myosin, they're already overlapped. So there just isn't very much more room to move. The more you contract, the less ability to produce force you have. Does that make sense? Right? If I squeeze, I can't, once I get to here, I can't really produce more force from here to here, right? I'm already squeezed out. But here's the thing, the exact opposite is true on the other side. As the velocity of an eccentric contraction, so this muscle lengthening, as the eccentric contraction increases, its ability to produce force increases. So basically, I have more ability to produce force when my muscle's like this than I do if it's already contracted, right? And so because your muscles have this sort of elastic property, we take advantage of this concept. We take advantage of this concept all the time using what is called a stretch shortening cycle. And what a stretch shortening cycle is it's a rapid eccentric contraction, so that's a rapid lengthening, resulting in a more powerful concentric contraction. So we lengthen our muscle out so that we can shorten it afterwards. Muscles have elastic properties. When you rapidly lengthen them, it will contract in the opposite direction, like a rubber band, right? So if you stretch a rubber band, it squeezes back the other way. I mean, look at what I did right there. I just saw myself do it in the camera, right? I opened this up, and you notice how my arms bounce forward naturally? That's because I stretched this muscle out, and my nervous system's going, whoa, stop it. And then it's squeezing the other way, right? Not to mention that just my stretchy ligaments and tendons are also pulling the opposite way. So when I go like this, my arms naturally bounce forward. But what's funny is I've been doing it a couple times, right? So it's actually losing that elastic property the more often I do it because my nervous system's going, ah, ah, ah. Okay, it's not scary anymore. So that's That's what we see in stretch shortening cycles, right? And this is why I'm going to show you an example of a stretch shortening cycle. And by the way, we're not spending too much time on stretch shortening cycles in this course, but next module, when we get to the sports class, super important concept. But let's go to YouTube here and just watch the NFL high jump. So watch this, right? When you look at a vertical jump in the NFL, and they teach them how to do this, right? Like before they go to like the combine, they're taking classes on, you know, how to effectively jump during the combine. So it's not like they're doing this on purpose. But here's the broad jump, right? Now watch what he does. Do you notice how he's not going down into his squat and like sitting like this and then jumping? Like he's not psyching himself up down below. What he's doing is he's going 1, 2, and then like look at that last one, right? Watch it. Slow, fast, boom. The reason he's throwing his arms like this. And when he throws his arms like this, you know, these have weight to them, right? So what that does, that pulls his body down, and it pulls him into, for his glutes, what is a stretched position, right? My glutes are shortened right now. They're stretched, they're shortened. They're stretched, they're shortened. So he's applying a stretch shortening cycle by rapidly stretching his glutes, boom, super fast. What happens is his nervous system goes, whoa, and then it contracts and shortens him, boom, up like this. That gives him more of an explosive jump. So when he does this, right, wham, that gives him a much broader jump. Let's watch another one, right? You'll notice everybody will do this, every single one of them, right? Boom. Wow, Andre Dillard has a bigger jump than I thought he would. That's pretty good. Now that was not awesome. That was slow. Look at this guy, right? Watch him. He could probably jump much further if somebody would help him learn form. But he kind of moves slowly and then jumps, right? But look at this. Boom. Look at how explosive that was, right? That's not a tall dude. That's pretty good.
But you also dealing with different weight too, though.
Oh no, totally, yeah. It's not, you know, they're not going to get a record on their distance. Yeah. We're just looking at like the force. Yeah, if you were to like look at their body weight and stuff. But I wish I could find DK Metcalf. He had a super, super impressive broad jump, even though he's a heavy dude. But it would take me forever to like look through it. Let's watch this one here. Let's watch like the vertical jump. They're going to do the same thing. They're going to do the exact same concept. And that's what's important here, right? Boom. Rapid stretch, so they get a rapid shortening. See, every one of them does it. And they're taught to do that because they are well, they don't, maybe they're not taught the physics of it, but there's Damian Harris. They're getting a stretch shortening cycle. There's AJ Brown. This kid was great. Look at that rapid stretch. Look at how fast they throw their arms down. That stretch is what gives them a rapid concentric contraction. So they are eccentrically, let's play it in slow motion here. Actually, you know what? Maybe I'm gonna look him up. DK Metcalf fumble. Ugh, don't even get me started. I was so stressed yesterday. Vertical jump. He had such a great vert. And I'm very biased because he's a Seahawk. All right. Here we go. Oh, the other way. There we go. Oh, and they play it in slow-mo. Look at that bird. He's so big. But watch how far, watch him. You'll notice he's going to throw his arms down. Right? He throws them down, that rapidly stretches so that he can rapidly shorten in the opposite direction. That's what gives him that big, super explosive, right? Not that. As much as I freaking love this drill. It's so fun to watch. Where's the broad jump? Oh, they didn't put his broad jump in this video. Nerds! All right, lame. His bench press was really impressive too. So anyway, that is when we talk about generating power. If you're trying to be explosive, you want to know how to apply a stretch shortening cycle. And it follows the basic principles of a force velocity curve. That's why all this is kind of taught together, right? Force velocity curve. As you rapidly lengthen something, you will be able to rapidly shorten it in the opposite direction. I'd say it's enough. I went into football land and got excited. So let's get back to the lesson. All right. Let's look at force couples, right? So force couples. What a force couple is, and I'm not talking about like Kim and Kanye. That's a force couple. I make that joke every time, and it's so stupid. A force couple are multiple muscles working together to produce movement around one joint. So the perfect, there's lots of force couples throughout your body, but the perfect example is your rotator cuff, right? So it's the synergistic action of muscles to produce movement around a joint. And I put a little note down here, which is like how I like to word it, which is obviously pretty lengthy because I like to talk. But it's how our muscles work together to produce movement surrounding a joint. The agonist will concentrically contract. The synergist will also, the agonist concentrically contracts along with the synergist, right? Both those are going to work together. The antagonist stabilizes by pulling in the opposite direction, and the stabilizers stabilize the entire area. So for instance, your upper trapezius pulls this way, while your serratus anterior pulls around the front, right? Your middle trapezius pulls this way, your lower trapezius pulls this way. So all of that is allowing you to produce movement. So all of these muscles are working together. I know that like the analogy I always like to use is like Batman versus the Joker, but they are supposed to work together in harmony, right? Like one pulls this way, one pulls this way, and that creates stability in the middle, right? Picture a steering wheel whenever you're driving, right? You've got your right hand and your left hand. If you pull up this way, you're pulling down this way. So that's a perfect force couple, right? You're creating stability. So, you know, when we screw up our force couples, which we love to do, by contracting too much in one direction and not enough in the other direction, we end up with altered movement patterns. We've messed up our force couples, right? So here's a couple really common force couples, your internal and your external obliques, right? When you contract one way, the other one is going to relax, right? And so that creates a force couple to allow you to have trunk rotation. Your upper trapezius and lower trapezius, right? There's your scapula. That's the one we saw in the picture. Your glutes, quadriceps, and calves, right? When you're performing like knee extension, when you come out of a squat, right? Your calf is plantar flexing. Your quadricep is knee extending, and your glute is hip extending. All that takes place every time you come out of a squat or every time you accelerate during like a step forward, right? So all of those are examples of force couples. It's your muscles working together, right? Okay, so now we're going to get into the most confusing part of this lecture. We're going to get into this part and the next part, this next little section here. So we do have to look at joint motions here, right? And the reason this is so confusing is because people label them differently and they use different letters to label them, which sometimes get confusing when you try to Google this stuff yourself. I don't know why the world didn't decide to get together and just, you know, use all the same letters in the same way that we have an anatomic position, which is standardized. But this is going to get just a slightly confusing. So, all right. When we look at arthrokinematics, remember, arthrokinematics means joint motion, right? Arthro for joints, kinematics for motion. And so what we need to remember is that in terms of just motion, your bone's job is to act as a lever, right? So if we look at like what a lever is, a lever, right? This is kind of what we're seeing here, right? You can see there's load, there's the seesaw, which is the lever, and then there's a pivot point, which is called the fulcrum, right? And so this lever, which is the plank here, is going to move about its pivot point right here. So that's what your bones are. Your bones are the levers, right? Your joints are the axis, right? They act as an axis for our bones, again, the levers to move, which, like I said, axis in your NASM textbook is characterized by an A. Everybody else in the world calls it a fulcrum. But that's what an axis is, right? In fact, I should just try to find one that has the word axis instead, so that this is less complicated. But like I said, everybody uses the word fulcrum. Lever versus axis. Google. Not helping me. See, this is one thing. I love NASM to death, but they kill me with this part. They really just screw this up with their labeling. I don't know if they're British or what. It's like whenever you try to convert metric to standard. All right. We're just going to keep moving. So the joint is the axis, right? So I got a lever, I got a place where they pivot, right? That's my axis. And then your muscles' job is to apply force, right, by generating tension. So that's going to move that lever, right? And then you have resistance, which is a resistive force that goes, against the muscle, right? So if you were to look at like my bicep here as a classic example, right? Here's my axis, right? My joint, right? That's my fulcrum. And then I've got this bone right here, which is my lever. So if I am applying force to that lever like this, right, it's going to lower it down, right? But my muscle is going to apply force in the opposite direction. So this is generating force. This is resistance. This is the axis. This is the lever. Okay. So we're going to kind of, that's in order to understand joint movement, we got to kind of understand stuff like that. And there's some rules associated with where resistance is being placed compared to a lever. So here's the thing, right? This, like I said, weighs 1 pound, but I can make it feel like it weighs more than that based on where I place it. So, and then don't worry about rotary motion. I put that up here, but it's not huge. So this is like I said, these are the levers and the fulcrums and stuff. This is why this is so complicated. Like I said, NASM uses different letters, which is frustrating. So you have a lever, which is a rigid bar that rotates around a fulcrum or an axis. And then you have an axis, which is really a fulcrum, which is a point of rotation. You have effort, which is what your muscles apply. And you have resistance, which is working against your muscles. Now, torque, which is not up here. Torque is a force that produces some type of rotation. And what you want to understand about torque is determined by how much force is being applied to something. And here's the rule for understanding torque. The closer a resistance is to the pivot point, the closer a resistive force is to wherever it's pivoting from, the less torque it has. So what I mean by that, this weighs 1 pound, right? So here's my pivot point, my elbow, right? If I set this here, it's very close to my elbow. This is going to not feel very heavy. But if I move it farther and farther and farther away from where it's pivoting, it's going to weigh more. So here's how you guys can experience this. If you've got anything in your room right now, grab something that weighs a couple pounds. If you got a dumbbell nearby, grab it, right? I'm just gonna use my coffee mug here, right? And what I want you to do is take your arm out like this and just hold this right here, okay? Just hold it like this. You can do it palm up if you want to, but I don't recommend it. I just recommend just holding it like this, okay? Not too bad, right? Doesn't feel crazy difficult or anything, right? You should be able to hold this up for quite a while. But now, I want you to move it out here. and try to keep holding it. And you're going to notice your shoulder is eventually going to start to burn. Now, this only weighs 1 pound. I really should grab something heavier. All of my workout equipment is in my yard. I have nothing heavy in my room. Oh, here we go. We will use the stool. All right. So if I hold this like this, my giant dumbbell here, right? It's fairly heavy, right? But it's not too bad. I can keep this up for quite some time. But if I hold it out here, right, I'm already starting to shake a little bit. This is relatively heavy. And the reason it feels heavier is because if you were to measure how many inches away my resistive force is, right? What is this? 13, 14 inches, right? But over here, that's like 26 inches, right? So the further away something is from wherever your pivot point is, the heavier it's going to feel. That's how we apply torque to our advantage. So let's say I've got a client who's working on like strengthening their shoulders, right? So I've got them in the gym and they're doing some shoulder abductions, right? I've got them doing this motion right here, right? And I'm in a gym that doesn't have like 7.5 pound weights. The dumbbell rack goes from 5 to 10 to 15 to 20, right? They don't have any of those like middle ground weights that you normally see in some gyms, right? So I got my client and I'm like, all right, we're going to do, a single leg shoulder abduction. So I've got him standing on one leg, right? And I've got him doing shoulder abductions here. Now, let's say they get really good at it. It's like, all right, well, let's make it single leg on an RX pad, right? So then I put them on a piece of equipment and they got to do it. That made it harder, but now they're like, okay, well, that's still too easy. So then I put them on a friggin' Bosu ball, right? Standing on one leg, but they get all through all 20 reps. And they're like, man, we got to make this harder. And it's like, okay, great. So I put those 5 pound dumbbells down and I give them 10 pounds. And then I just put them back to 2 legs on the floor, right? So they're not even doing single leg. They're in the most stable. And they just can't even get the right number of reps. They can only get 8 repetitions, right? And I want to work them from 12 to 20 repetitions. Now I could just like build up their endurance slowly. I could just say, well, we're going to do 8. And then next week we'll do 9. Then we'll do 10 and 11. Eventually we'll get to 12, right? I could do that. But the problem is if I'm only doing 8, and this is, Noel, we haven't really been over this yet. But Irene, this will sound familiar to you because we've talked about energy systems. I don't want to do 8 reps. That targets the wrong energy system. That's not what my client wants to work on. My client wants to focus aerobic. So I want to do 12 to 20 reps. I don't want to train in the wrong energy system. I want to train in the aerobic system. So 5 pounds is too light. 10 pounds is too heavy. So you know what I can do? I can shorten the lever. And that's a sneaky way for me to make 10 pounds feel like less weight. So instead of doing my shoulder raises like this, what I'll do is I'll have them bend their elbows and do their shoulder raises like this. And by bringing the weight closer to my pivot point, which is now my shoulder, right? So I'm doing this. This is my pivot point. By bringing the weight closer to the pivot point here, that is going to make that weight feel way lighter. So I'll give them maybe a 15 pound dumbbell and do this version of a lateral raise. And then maybe that's enough to build up their shoulders strong enough to where eventually I can get them back to the straight arm version, which I like better, but you got to do what you got to do. How you guys feeling about that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Torque is a pain in the rear. I'll be honest. I think torque sometimes is kind of a pain in the butt. By the way, this is why this is really important to make sure you have good form, because you'll be applying torque in the wrong way sometimes. Let's take a look at an example like that, right? Remember how I always talk about how, like, sometimes when people have tight calves, they have that excessive forward lean, so they squat like this with their chest going really low, right? What's the big deal, right? Why is that such a bad deal? I mean, so what? They squat the wrong way. What do I care? Well, here's the thing. What if you put a barbell on their back and now suddenly they're doing this barbell squat and they're leaning forward like crazy, right? Who cares, right? Here's why it's dangerous. This is why it eventually puts too much stress. Let's say excessive forward lean barbell squat. I really hope I can get a picture of this. Let's see, I want to find a trainer who has sacrificed their body by doing this the wrong way. There we go. This guy did it. Oh, he did it with a PVC pipe. Smart man. I can't tell you how many times I've hurt myself being like, don't do it this way. And I'm like, ha, because you'll hurt yourself. So like, see how far he's leaning forward? Here's the thing. Here's the resistive force. Here's his pivot point. It's way farther away than if he were upright. Now, look, it's not as far away. If he were leaning forward, the bar would be over here and his pivot point would be in the same place. So you know what that does? That puts way, way, way too much stress on his spine right here. And it's very dangerous. And the same thing is true with any other type of form. So I know that like sometimes when I start droning on and stuff like this, you don't have to be like, no, it's fine. Trust me, I get it. When we're talking about muscles and levers and stuff, sometimes you're like, oh, okay, like just show me how to do a squat properly, right? But the reason we study these levers and we look at these levers and we understand them is because that puts special emphasis on why good form is so important to our clients. When we have bad form, it's not about like the principle of it. It's like, you know, why do you have to squat the right way? You know, well, I like to squat this way, right? The reason it's important is because when you do it the wrong way, you're applying too much force and you've got muscles that really are just not designed to deal with that much force. So, and you have a skeletal system which is really not designed to move that way. So when you move that way, you're going to overtax those muscles or overtax that skeletal system, and eventually something's going to give and something's going to break, right? Something's going to get busted. So that's why all these like lever things are important. I didn't put all three types of levers in your notes because you're really not going to be tested on them. But I do want to put special emphasis on understanding the levers just because like it helps us understand why good form is so important, which should always be priority number one for every trainer out there. We always got to make sure we're moving the way we're supposed to. When you see a client and they do their squat the wrong way, we got to stop them because we don't want them to we don't want them to tax their body the wrong way. Yeah, what's up, Arian? Question.
Speaking of form, the tip you gave me last week, doing the plank with the little tip with the arch in the back because my upper back was hurt.
Yeah.
Oh, fucking God, that made a huge difference.
Right? Totally, yeah. You know, it's funny. I was looking at, I cracked open my corrective book for the first time in a while recently, and I was just like, man, I haven't looked at this in a while. Because I was looking at it, I cracked it open because I was like, I wonder if I can I wanted to make sure that I downloaded a copy offline. This is the textbook you're going to get, by the way, but I was like, I wonder if I can just get like a PDF version. And sure enough, I was able to find one. Don't tell anybody. But here's the corrective book, and it's a PDF version. I'm trying to remember what page it was on. But I was looking at like some of the assessments, and it's funny you mentioned that, Irene, because I was just being like, I kind of forgot. I haven't done this assessment in a while, just a classic like push-up alignment assessment. And what you should see in a push-up assessment is like, he's got a nice straight, you know, somewhat bent, but like for the most part, really straight. And you'll look, sometimes you'll see an excessive rounding, or you'll see a sagging, which is what we were talking about in your plank, right? We saw a little bit of a sag. Or we'll see like the shoulders pushing up like this, or we'll see like scapular winging. This one here is my big struggle, by the way. I'm a scapular winger. Or you'll see like a rounding in the cervical spine. And all of these tell you a little bit about overactive, underactive muscles. And like, I was just reflecting on this and I was like, man, I haven't like put somebody through that version of an assessment in a really long time. Because that's kind of something that will happen in your guys' careers. You'll get really obsessive about like something for a little while and like.
But don't you want to work out those muscles?
What's that?
Don't you want to work out both of them muscles, kind of balance out under and overactive muscles?
Oh, totally. Yeah. What you want to do is you want to stretch the overactive stuff to get it back to a neutral length. It's too short, so you want to stretch it to normal length. And your underactive stuff, you want to shorten it back to neutral length. So that's why you look at postural distortions like this And then what you do is you go to one side of the joint and you stretch it all. You go to the other side of the joint and you strengthen it all. And that pulls you back to neutral.
Okay.
But yeah, like we were talking about, hey, I was like reflecting very fondly on this because like, you know, I think what's going to happen in your guys' careers, if you're like me, I get really obsessive about like, you know, I'll like learn a new exercise and I'll be like, that's so cool. And then like, I'll give it to like everybody, you know, and then like, I'll forget about something for a couple months and I'll be like, oh wait, there's this one that's, you know, I'll get a client with a specific postural distortion. And I'll be like, you know what'll fix that? This thing that I haven't thought about in years. Like you'll pull it out of the back of your brain, and then I'll get really obsessive about that for a little while, and it's kind of fun, you know. But yeah, you made me think of that when you were talking about that plank adjustment. I was thinking about this push-up assessment because you got a little bit of that sagging motion with that excessive like arch, right? So again, you got to do a little hip flexor stretch. You got to do a little glute strengthening, and then it gets you back to neutral.
Yeah, so I'm kind of alternating doing squat jumps. I mean, not squat jumps, like box jumps on the stairs.
Love it.
Yeah, and with the plank, I imagine like your belly button being sort of drawn towards your back a little bit.
Yeah, that's
that
great.
helps him. Yeah, and then the push up too.
Fine.
Yeah, and then the push up, the form. I need to next time when we meet up, I'm gonna do it and ask you to correct my form.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you for that great tip.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. Actually, I want to meet. I want to meet tomorrow. Yeah, so we'll see. Okay, so let's look at our levers here real quick. So our levers that we got. Here's that first. This is what's called a first class lever, right? And a first class lever is the seesaw. You can see an axis here. That's your fulcrum. And then you have effort and resistance, right? So if resistance pulls this way, the seesaw will come up like this, right? So what we want to do is we want to apply effort in the opposite direction. So like, you know, crowbar is a good example of that, or a trowel here, right? So basically, first class levers are what we're going to see where there's like kind of a pivot point in the middle. Your neck is a good example of this, right? You get this way and this way, you're pivoting in the center. Then you have second class levers. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that's right. The neck is an example. Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah, first class levers. I thought I moved on to second class. I was like, I can't be wrong. So here's a classic example, right? Resistance and effort this way. Your triceps are another really good example of that, right? You're pivoting on your elbow here, right? And so resistance, and so you're producing effort in the opposite direction. Then you get second class levers. Second class levers are like a wheelbarrow. So the pivot point's actually at the end. Instead of being in the middle, right? Like before I was pivoting like this. Now I'm pivoting from here. So I'm just swinging like this, right? This is staying static and this is moving like that. So a wheelbarrow, right? It pivots on the bottom and you just lift it up and, you know, take it to wherever it's going. So a nutcracker is a really good example of that, right? That's a second class lever. Your ankle, remember how I'd mentioned like plantar flexion and dorsiflexion are special? This is why. So like your foot doing this, that's actually an example of a second class lever. Your foot's kind of like a wheelbarrow. It's pivoting against the ground and just tipping forward and tipping backwards, right? So it's pivoting like that. Whereas before it was, you know, we were doing a seesaw action. That's a first class. This is second class, right? I'm just moving and pivoting along that point. Then you have third class levers. Third class levers are an example like a shovel. This is kind of an interesting one because what you've got is you've got like force being applied back here, right? But then you've got your arm acting as a midpoint and you can adjust where it's at, right? So I could shovel it from here or I could shovel it from here, right? And so like that's a second class lever, or I'm sorry, third class lever. This is what you're gonna mostly see throughout your body. Most of your body uses third class levers. So what's really great about third class levers is because there's the pivot point in the middle, it actually makes it way easier. You can get a lot more work done with very minimal effort. So if you look here, right, you've got your axis of rotation here. and that bone actually hooks around the other end. So that allows you to use this as a third class lever in your elbow. This is why this is just like so common throughout your whole body. So if we look at like a, I'm going to pull up something. I'm going to pull it up again on the knee day, but we talk about like your patella and why it's so awesome. It's because it's an example of a third class lever. And so you're able to get way more work done because what's happening is you've got effort and you're applying it this way, right? His hand pulling this way, that's effort. Resistive force is pulling down. It's the gravity of the plank here this way. But then you've got a pivot point in the center between these two separate segments here. And that's what allows you to do a lot of work with very little effort. That's why it's so common throughout your body. Your body is arranged in this amazing way that it can do so much work and it doesn't have to work very hard to do it. And that's mostly thanks to things like third class levers, where his hand here in the middle hand, right? He's applying this rotation here and he's applying effort with this middle hand, and that is giving him this major advantage. Now, he can move his hands this way. That'll actually minimize that advantage. You can move it this way, that'll maximize that advantage, or you can put it in the middle, right? Which is what most people actually end up doing, just because none of us are shoveling by leaning all the way down to the ground. Okay, then like I said, there are things like rotary motion and torque. Rotary motion is where you get pulling on both sides to create a rotation, right? Steering wheel. And then torque is the force that produces that rotation. The closer the weight is, the less torque it has. The farther the weight is, the more torque it has. Again, that's why, you know, the farther away actually made it easier versus the shorter, like this version here, which would make it harder. Yeah, question.
So is the motor behavior just an extent, like same thing as rotary motion?
Oh, no. We're actually about to get to motor behavior. Motor behavior is just how that's a nervous system question. Right now, we're just talking about physics. We're doing math right now, but we're going to get to motor behavior is the last thing we're going to talk about today. And that's how your brain learns all of this stuff, right? It's how your nervous system memorizes how to move properly. That's what motor behavior is, right? That's the last thing we're doing. Oh, no, we got feedback at the end. So motor behavior is just how your brain goes, that's heavy, I need lots of motor neurons. Or that's light, I need very few motor neurons. That's motor behavior. So we'll get there in just a sec. So last little bit, here's an example, like I said, with the chair earlier. This is a practical understanding of torque and how to manipulate torque. So let's say you're holding a dumbbell straight out at your side, right? The weight is 24 inches away from the pivot point, which is my shoulder, right? But if I, so if we look at that, right, that's 24 inches away. So the prime mover for shoulder abduction is the deltoid muscle, which is about, 2 inches long. So that's a difference of 22 inches, okay? So that's 11 times greater, the length of the muscle compared to how far it has to pull. So 11 times as far. But if I move the weight closer to the center by bending my elbow, now the weight is only 12 inches away from the pivot point. So this 2-inch muscle has to pull 12 inches instead of 22 inches, which is only 5 times greater in terms of length. And that's why this is going to feel easier than this, even though you might be holding the same dumbbell. And you can practice that, by the way. We had to do this in class actually one time. Hold the same pound dumbbell in your hand, like one here and one here, and do this at the same time. You'll notice your body will go and tip this way because this will feel so much heavier. Or we had a teacher who was like, actually, you guys want to see you want to break your brain? Well, I had a teacher do this. He was like, who thinks, because we were all like, we're studying kinesiology, right, where everybody lifts weights. And he was like, who in here thinks they can hold up this pencil? This is a pen, but he was like, who can hold up this pencil the longest? And like all of us guys, all the like macho dudes were like, oh, I can hold that pencil forever. It's a pencil. I benched, 185 this morning, And so what he made us do is he made us hold it like this, just balancing it on 2 fingers, and we had to hold it straight out like this. So what he did is he lined all the guys up. He's like, all right, well, you're just gonna sit here, and then we stood at the front of the room and just held a pencil out like this, and then he just went on with his lecture. And he's like, so anyway, when you're learning torque and this, and he's basically doing the lecture I'm doing, and so we're all there and we're like, and it's just getting heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier, and he let one kid bend his elbows and hold it like this, and he was just looking at all of us, and we're like, and so that was how we all learned torque that day. I did that in class one time. But it kind of makes your shoulders cramp up. So I remember having shoulder pain afterwards because I was so determined to hold it up. Anyway, let's go ahead and look at motor behavior, because Irene, you were just asking about this, right? So what is motor behavior? What is it? It is your motor response to that internal external stimulus, right? So remember, we said movement is a response, it's your body's responding to information, about the body itself, but also information about how it's interacting with the outside world. So we've got kind of 3 main things here. So it's how your kinetic chain is able to create and how it is able to learn movements. That's what your motor behavior is. So the behavior, right, is kind of a big term describing all of this. Oh, and one other thing, basically you can also think of motor behavior as, this is my little sub note here. Think of it as your muscle memory. Muscles don't have memories, right? They don't have their own little internal brains, but they are connected to your nervous system. So when you think of muscle memory, and it's how you instinctively know how to throw your arm up and catch something, right? You don't have to think about all of that because you've caught stuff before. So that's what your motor behavior is. Now there's 3 parts of it. There's motor control, motor learning, and then the one that we spend a lot of time working on with our clients, which is motor development. So motor control is how the nervous system integrates that information to produce a response. So it's how your central nervous system has information coming in and then it responds to it. Stretch reflexes, like I mentioned earlier, that stretch shortening cycle, this is a really good example of motor control, right? Your nervous system is designed to go, whoa, that got stretched, and then contract in the opposite direction. So it controls your body that way. But you've also got motor learning, and motor learning is the integration of motor control through practice and through experience, doing it over and over and over again, continued exposure. So that leads to relatively permanent change. I have not ridden a bicycle in years because I don't like it. Since I trained for a triathlon. Remember, Irene, you were asking me about why I don't, you're like, have you ever considered doing an Ironman? And I was like, no, and I never would. I don't like biking. I do not like my butt getting all raw from sitting on the seat of a bicycle. I hate it. I got a bony butt. So I do not like it at all. I did triathlons for a little while because I was like, that's the ultimate cardio sport. Never again. Yeah, I'm retired. I would totally go back to obstacle course racing. If it got cheaper, I would totally do that again. But I'm just not interested in ever getting back into triathloning. But I guarantee you, despite not riding a bike, if you were to put me on one, I would remember how to do it like that. And so would you, right? You never forget how to ride a bike. That's because of motor learning. Your nervous system spent so much time learning how to do it, it's going to remember even though it hasn't done it in years, okay? So it's the integration of that motor control, right, through practice and experience. And then there's the overall development over your lifespan, which is your motor development. And that's the overall change in your motor skills through time over your your entire lifespan. So we're going to experience different types of motor development, and it's going to develop in good ways, and it's going to develop in bad ways. If you're typing all day and you're rounding your shoulders and you're getting into this position more and more and more, you are motor learning how to get really good at this. And so you're motor developing over time the ability to be a hunchback, right? So you have altered your motor control. Now your nervous system only knows how to control it that way rather than the way it's supposed to. And so your motor behavior is jacked up, right? So we need to spend time as trainers, like teaching our, like helping our clients with new motor learning so that they can develop it over time. And here's the thing, it took years of motor development to get the way you got. If you've got an alteration in posture, it took years for you to get this way. It is not going away overnight. But doesn't mean you can't fix it over time, right? We just got to spend all that time doing it. So when we're talking about like our muscle synergies, right? Groups of muscles working together to move and produce movement around a joint, you know, your nervous system recruits all of your muscles together. So that's that's the thing about shoulder rounding, right? There's no one muscle that's causing shoulder rounding. It's your pecs being really tight. Maybe it's your abs actually pulling you downward a little bit. It's overactive muscles in your neck, which is putting too much pressure. So then that kind of dives you down even further, right? So it's all of these muscles working together synergistically to kind of screw up your posture. Over time, through like different like learning, we can teach those synergies how to, you know, hey, you're supposed to be relaxed right now. Relax, allow us to get back to that neutral position, right? Or if we're just trying to learn how to do like a good squat or a good shoulder press, right? Your quads, hamstrings, and gluteus muscles, they all got to work together. My hamstrings love to do way more than they're supposed to. They love to shut down my quadricep muscles, right? And shut down my glutes. These guys right here, for me, they like to squeeze way more than they're supposed to. And then my glute goes, well, I can't do anything. You know, Batman's like, I'm just going to sit over here in the corner while Robin does all the work, you know, like, and I'm like, shut up, hamstrings. You know, this is something that I work on constantly because I have kind of weird other habits, you know. Your overactive muscles are going to be different from mine, and they're going to be different from your clients. But we've all got them, you know. So again, this all kind of goes back to that main concept that we taught on day one, which I said was like the most important freaking thing in the world, which is proprioception, right? Your body's understanding of where it is in space. So remember, proprioception is going to use information from muscles, tendons, ligaments, joint receptors, muscle spindles, Golgi tendon organs. It's going to use all the information it's getting from all of that in order to understand what position it is in the body and like how it is responding to, you know, these movements and these stresses. So, you know, that's your proprioception. So this is why core training is so important, because that's going to teach your brain where your spine is, which is your center in space. This is why balance is so important, because that teaches your body where it is, right? If you're standing on one leg and you know that you need to squeeze a little bit to get back to neutral, that proprioception is going to enhance your posture. So that's why core and balance training are so important for us, right? And one other thing that kind of comes down to that as well, part of proprioception is another term called sensory motor integration, which I don't know, it really is kind of the same thing as like motor control, but it's your nervous system's ability to gather information, interpret that information, and execute the appropriate response. So it's sensing things with the nervous system, and then through like motor response, applying in the right direction. So for instance, like, you know, for force reduction, for instance, it knows that it has to, you know, produce less force than a resistance. That's sensing, oh, that weighs 5 pounds and I'm trying to lower it. I'll squeeze for 4 pounds, right? That's sensory motor integration. It senses information coming in and it integrates it with whatever the appropriate response is to produce that movement. Now, again, we often screw up our sensory motor integration through moving the wrong way. And that's why I put this note down here. This is not actually part of the PowerPoint, but one of the things we always talk about in our program design classes is what is called the principle of specificity, which is more commonly known as the SAID principle, because it stands for specific adaptation to imposed demands. basically your body will adapt very specifically to whatever demand you place upon it. Again, you have to train your clients with good form. If they train with bad form, they're going to learn bad form, right? And then their body is going to adapt to move the wrong way. So that's due to sensory motor integration. There's also some energy system stuff there, but again, not part of our conversation today. So in order to develop, so we're going to kind of work our way up again, right? So you want to make sure you apply the principle. You want to make sure that you apply the principle of specificity and train the body specifically how it was designed to move so that it will develop proper sensory motor integration and have appropriate proprioception, right? So we went this way and then we unraveled it. All right, so when we look at motor learning, right, and we look at how we learn all these new movements, how the heck are we going to do it? It's like if we're training a client, how are we going to help them, learn movements the appropriate way, right? If we go back to motor learning, right, it's up here. Integration of motor control through practice and experience, right? How are we going to apply effective practice? How do we practice the way we're supposed to, right? Well, that's where we look at our movements, how they are learned, and we use feedback, right? We tell our clients, like, because a lot of times they're going to feel things the wrong way. They're going to be like, that felt good, and then it turns out they're tilting. It felt good because your body has moved the wrong way for so long. So we need to use feedback, and there's two types of feedback here. You've got feedback is the use of sensory information and sensory motor integration to help in motor learning, right? So we're going to use feedback to help our clients like learn whether or not they move the way they're supposed to, but they're also going to need to feel that feedback themselves. This is another thing about coaching. You don't just want to tell your clients, that looked really good. You want to tell your clients, hey, that looked really good. Did you feel how that was different than what you did the first time? And they're like, oh yeah, I could feel how like it squeezed more on this side. Perfect. That's exactly what we're looking for, right? So I want them to have both external feedback from me telling them about their squat, right? But I also want them to have internal feedback, and I want them to feel their body. So there's our two types of feedback. So internal feedback is the process whereby sensory information is used by the body to monitor its environment, right? So the body is monitoring its movements and kind of feeling those movements. That's internal feedback. And then external feedback is information provided by like an external source. So, a heart rate monitor is an example of external feedback. It's like, okay, I'm feeling more out of breath right now, right? That's internal feedback. And then they look at their heart rate monitor and they see their heart rate's elevated and they're like, okay, I know that I'm working really hard right now. So that's internal versus external, right? So internal feedback is afferent feedback, right? Sensory feedback, your body feeling information. External feedback is like, hey, good job, or even just things like I said, like a heart rate monitor or a videotape. If you watch a videotape of yourself and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I was like leaning so far to the right? That's external feedback. So there's kind of two big parts of this, right? When it comes to external feedback, there's knowledge of results and there's knowledge of performance. Knowledge of results is used after the completion of a movement, just to let you know about like, hey, the movement's over, or good job, right? And then knowledge of performance is information about like the quality of the reps, right? So an example of knowledge of results is telling a client that their squats were really good, right? And then an example of knowledge of performance is like during the squat being like, hey, your knees are rotating externally, right? So that's what makes your squat good. So knowledge of results is like, Irene, I thought you did excellent there in your calf presses. That looked really good. You were in alignment, right? That's knowledge of results. But then I said, so you were keeping your toes forward versus like your toes look like this versus what you used to do, which was this, right? So that's a really good improvement there. That's knowledge of performance. Do you see the slight difference there? One is like, you did it. Two is like, you did it well because you did X, Y, and Z. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah, there's a fine line. It seems so similar.
Yeah, and honestly, you're probably not going to see like a question related to the two of those. You'll see like internal versus external, but like, I don't know. I don't think you'll see a question like this. I could be wrong. But yeah, knowledge of results is like, good job. Knowledge of performance is good job because.
Okay.
That's knowledge of performance. So here's the thing about internal feedback versus external feedback. I love that they put this note in here. Clients may make sure that they don't become too dependent on your external feedback, like a fitness professional, because then they're going to detract from like their ability to develop internal feedback. Like when we pay too much attention to like, a trainer telling us what to do, we stop doing it for ourselves, right? We lose that. Where it's like, I'm not paying attention to how I feel. My trainer's going to tell me how I'm supposed to move, So make sure that you are always, when you're working with your clients, make sure that you like make them part of the conversation. Be like, hey, that looked really good. Did you feel how this was different than that first round? And they're like, yeah, I could feel this turn on a little more. Awesome, right? When they take that, helping your clients like take that moment to recognize the difference is huge. So, summarizing it all up, all your movement systems need to work together to synergistically. Your muscular system has to work with your nervous system to move your skeletal system the way it's supposed to. And we, luckily, as trainers, a lot of what the rest of this class is going to be spent like understanding, how we're supposed to move. And so understanding that internal environment versus that external environment, and using proprioception with our clients, helping them, develop that knowledge, that feedback, right, in order to enhance their motor learning. This is why all this stuff is so important. We're going to spend so much time being like, this is how you're supposed to move. You're moving like this. Here's why you're moving like this, right? I can see your knees caving in because your adductors are pulling more than you're supposed to, and this muscle over here is being lazy. So I want you to squeeze this muscle right now, get that muscle recruited, pull it out, right? And they're like, okay, I can do that, right? That's going to help your clients become part of the conversation, and they're more likely to make these really positive adjustments. But that is about all I got for you in terms of lesson content today. Do you guys have any questions about anything I might have moved through too quickly?
So, Brad, the motor behavior is part of the nervous system.
Yeah, it's how your nervous system, yeah. I mean, honestly, it really is just your nervous system, but it's how it's recruiting your muscular system and how it's moving your skeletal system. That's your motor behavior is like how you move. It's your habits, Like, Irene, do you ever, like, when you sit down, do you do this? I know I do this. I can't really see. Hold on. I have this bad habit sometimes. I do this a lot.
Yeah.
Kick one leg under, right?
Yeah.
That's part of my motor behavior. And I'm doing it with my right now because I normally do it with my left. And that could explain why I've screwed up my SI joint, I mean, when I had that fall the other day and it screwed everything up, right? It could be because I just sit like this too often. And so I had an asymmetry, and then it was asymmetric, and then it got impacted and made it move even further. Maybe, So that's part of motor behavior, right? Or are you the type of person who, do you always stretch, right? And then you do and you do one extra one over here, That's those small little habits. Those are all part of our motor behavior. I have a weird habit where this is actually why my hamstrings are overactive. This is going to sound this is personal and very weird. But I do this weird thing where I squeeze my hamstrings to like the rhythm of songs and stuff. Like most people tap their feet and I fidget my hamstrings. And that's why they are just so overactive, because I'm spending basically 24 hours a day just like squeezing them all day. And it's a terrible habit. I don't know how to stop it.
But isn't that sort of like working with bands, kind of like, because you're working the muscles? No, like what you're doing?
I mean, in a way, I'm working the muscles, but I need to stop working those muscles.
Balance, I see.
Yeah, they're working all day long, and now they're just like, we're used to being like this, and they need to be like this. So yeah, that's your motor behavior. It's all your learned habits. Do you sit into
Okay.
one leg? That's a motor behavior, right? Um, most of the motor behavior we're spending time helping our clients recognize is, their weird postural distortion.
Why you got to work on posture, right? It's
Totally,
important to work on posture
right? All day. Pinch those shoulder blades back.
and
Pull that head
practice.
back. This is not good posture either, right? But neutral, that's what we're looking for. Any other questions? No? Okay, so we're gonna try the new thing tomorrow. We're doing the new workshop style tomorrow. We're gonna meet at Van Nuys Park. Noel, I'm gonna send out an email. When I put out the email today, it's gonna have instructions for how to get there. It's optional. Like I said, it's always gonna be optional. But we're gonna look at some movement compensations tomorrow. So we're not gonna do any SAQ. I know the SAQ is the most fun thing in the world. But what we're gonna look at is we're gonna look at some static posture, and we're gonna look at some movement postures, and we're gonna review and say, okay, so we see this person moving this way. What muscles cause that? I know, but it's not as fun. But we're looking at, we're gonna look at these like movement compensations and be like, okay, so you move this way. What muscle causes you to move that way? Okay, great. So that means you've got short muscles here and long muscles here. We gotta lengthen the short ones. We gotta shorten the long ones. We gotta get you back to neutral, right? So that's what we're gonna look at tomorrow. And that'll kind of prime up our conversation for the second half of this class when we are looking at each of these individual joints, ankles, knees, hips, spine, in two parts of our spine, and shoulder. But yeah,
I'm so looking forward to it.
yeah, it'll be really fun. And we're doing morning and an evening session. So we'll do 9 a.m. That way, anybody, you can have an extra 30 minutes to kind of get there instead of, so we're not doing 8:30, we're doing 9. And then we're going to do 6 instead of 5:30. That way, if anybody's getting off work, they can have time to get there. So it'll be in the park, both lectures. They're optional if you're, please bring a mask, please bring water. It's going to be hot. If you want to bring a mat, it's helpful sometimes. You'll see the email. It's going to have all the details in the email. And yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow. That'll do it for today.
Thanks, Brad. See you
You're
tomorrow.
welcome. All right, see you tomorrow.